My father pulled our family car up to a bus stop 3 towns away from where I just graduated high school, handed me $14 folded into a small, deliberate square, and told me, without a trace of hesitation, that I was officially an adult now and the family had decided it was time I made my own way. My mother didn't look back once as they drove away. My younger sister's face pressed briefly against the rear window before the car turned the corner and disappeared entirely from view. I stood there on that bus stop bench, still wearing my graduation gown, $14 in my hand and absolutely nowhere confirmed to sleep that night. Stick with me because my family genuinely believed, driving away from that curb, that they would never have to think about me again. They were wrong, in ways none of them could have possibly anticipated that afternoon. My name is Sable Winter. I'm 26 years old, and the afternoon my family abandoned me at that bus stop, just hours after my high school graduation ceremony, represents the exact moment I stopped being anyone's daughter or sister in any meaningful sense, and started instead becoming entirely deliberately my own person. My parents, Roswell and Junette Winter, had never made any particular secret throughout my adolescence that I represented, in their own private calculation, something considerably closer to an inconvenient obligation than a genuinely wanted child, language and treatment I'd absorbed throughout years of quiet, accumulating evidence that my own presence within our family unit existed on considerably more conditional terms than my younger sister Delphine's own comfortable, secure position. That specific graduation day abandonment, though genuinely devastating in the moment, ultimately represented simply the most extreme, undeniable expression of a pattern that had shaped my entire childhood, one where my family's genuine affection and investment had always flowed considerably more generously toward Delphine than toward me, culminating in a decision so calculated and complete that they'd apparently timed it deliberately for the exact moment my formal legal adulthood removed whatever remaining obligation they felt toward my continued care. To understand how my own parents arrived at a decision so genuinely devastating as abandoning their 18-year-old daughter at a distant bus stop with nothing beyond $14 to her name, you have to understand the particular dynamics that had shaped our family throughout my entire childhood, dynamics centered almost entirely around a fundamental, persistent sense that I simply didn't fit as naturally into our family unit as my younger sister Delphine always had. I was adopted into the Winter family at age 3, following circumstances involving my birth mother's own genuine inability to care for me safely, a history my parents never hid from me but also never discussed with any particular warmth or genuine acknowledgement of the complicated emotions surrounding my own early childhood experience. Delphine, born to my parents naturally 4 years after my own adoption, occupied, from her very earliest years, a position of clear, consistent favor that our parents rarely made any genuine effort to disguise or moderate. I remember, throughout my childhood, countless small moments that individually seemed relatively minor but that, considered collectively across years of accumulated pattern, painted an increasingly clear picture of exactly how conditionally my own place within our family had always been regarded. Birthday celebrations that felt noticeably more modest than Delphine's own elaborate parties, academic achievements that received considerably more muted acknowledgement than her comparable accomplishments, a general household atmosphere that consistently positioned my own needs and presence as somewhat secondary to Delphine's more naturally, unconditionally embraced position. My mother, in particular, maintained a specific kind of distant, careful politeness toward me throughout my entire childhood that never quite developed into the genuine warmth she extended so naturally toward Delphine, a distinction I recognized clearly even as a young child, though I lacked, throughout those early years, the language or understanding to fully articulate exactly what I was experiencing or why it felt so genuinely different from whatever ordinary sibling dynamics other families apparently navigated. As I moved through adolescence, the specific pattern of favoritism toward Delphine and comparative distance toward me only intensified, my parents investing considerably more visible enthusiasm and resources into supporting Delphine's various interests and activities than they ever extended toward my own, comparable pursuits throughout those same formative years. I remember specifically my own participation in our school's debate team throughout my junior and senior years, an activity I'd genuinely thrown myself into with considerable dedication and eventually real success, qualifying for regional competitions that required my parents' attendance and support in ways that felt, throughout that entire 2-year period, genuinely begrudging rather than the enthusiastic encouragement Delphine received for her own considerably less demanding extracurricular interests. My guidance counselor, Ms. Elvira Pruitt, became someone I confided in increasingly throughout those difficult final years of high school, someone who noticed, through her own professional observation, patterns in how I described my home life that concerned her, genuinely, gently encouraging me on several occasions to consider whether the dynamics I described reflected something worth addressing more directly with a school counselor or, potentially, outside support, given how consistently troubling the pattern she was hearing described seemed to genuinely represent. I graduated high school with genuinely strong academic credentials and a partial scholarship offered to a state university roughly 6 hours from our hometown, achievements I'd worked toward with considerable determination throughout those difficult final years, believing, perhaps naively, that these accomplishments might finally earn some genuine acknowledgement or pride from parents who had, throughout my entire adolescence, seemed genuinely unmoved by whatever I managed to achieve. Independently, graduation day itself proceeded with a surface-level normalcy that gave no indication whatsoever of what my parents were apparently already planning to do that same afternoon. My family attending the ceremony, taking the expected photographs, offering congratulations that felt, in hindsight, considerably more perfunctory than genuinely celebratory, given everything I would discover about their actual intentions within just a few hours of that ceremony's conclusion. I remember specifically my father's expression throughout the ceremony itself, a careful neutrality that I'd genuinely mistaken in the moment for simple reserved pride rather than what I would soon understand represented someone already mentally preparing to execute a decision he and my mother had apparently discussed and finalized well before that specific day arrived. We drove away from the school together as a family, my parents mentioning something vague about needing to run an errand before heading home, a detail that struck me, even in the moment, as slightly unusual given the significance of the day, though I genuinely had no reason at that point to suspect anything beyond ordinary family logistics. The drive continued considerably longer than any reasonable errand would have required, eventually arriving at a bus stop in a town I didn't immediately recognize, roughly 3 towns away from our own home, where my father parked the car, turned to face me directly, and delivered the specific words that would permanently, irreversibly reshape my entire understanding of my own family and my place within it. "You're 18 now," my father said, his voice carrying a rehearsed quality that made unmistakably clear this specific speech had been prepared and considered well before that moment. "Legally an adult. Your mother and I have talked about it, and we think it's time you made your own way in the world the way any independent adult eventually needs to." I sat there genuinely stunned, struggling to process what I was actually hearing, my graduation gown still draped over my regular clothes, my diploma resting on my lap where I'd been holding it carefully throughout the drive. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice carrying a confusion that hadn't yet fully processed the devastating reality unfolding around me. "Where are we? Why did we stop here?" My father handed me $14, folded carefully into a small deliberate square, a gesture that felt, in its very precision, almost more devastating than the actual words accompanying it. "This should help you get started," he said. "There's a bus that comes through here regularly. You'll figure out where you want to go from here." I remember looking toward my mother, genuinely hoping to find some sign of hesitation or objection, but she remained facing forward, her expression carefully composed, offering no acknowledgement whatsoever of the devastating scene unfolding just behind her. Delphine, seated beside her in the back seat, glanced toward me with an expression I couldn't fully read, something between discomfort and genuine confusion, though she, like our mother, offered no verbal objection to what was actually happening. I stepped out of the car mechanically, still processing the surreal, devastating nature of what was actually occurring, watching my father pull away from that curb with a finality that made unmistakably clear this represented no momentary lapse in judgment, but rather a carefully planned, deliberate decision they'd apparently discussed and prepared for well in advance of that specific afternoon. I stood there on that unfamiliar bus stop bench, still wearing my graduation gown, $14 clutched in my hand, watching my family's car disappear around a distant corner, genuinely uncertain, in that first disorienting moment, whether this represented some kind of extreme, ultimately temporary lesson they intended to eventually reverse, or something considerably more permanent and devastating than my mind could initially fully process. I remember the specific, disorienting quality of those first minutes alone, the late afternoon sun beginning its slow descent toward evening, unfamiliar streets and businesses surrounding me in a town I had no genuine connection to or understanding of, my entire life's belongings still sitting, I would later confirm, packed into boxes at my parents' house rather than anywhere within my own immediate possession or control. I sat on that bus stop bench for nearly an hour, processing genuine shock and disbelief, before finally accepting the practical reality that whatever had just happened represented my genuine, immediate circumstances rather than some temporary situation I could simply wait out until my family inevitably returned to collect me, a realization that finally prompted me toward the kind of practical, immediate problem-solving that would define my following weeks and months of genuine, difficult, independent survival. I used a portion of that $14 to purchase a bus ticket toward the nearest town with a homeless services organization I vaguely remembered hearing about through a school assembly months earlier, arriving that same evening at a youth shelter that provided emergency temporary housing for exactly the kind of sudden, devastating situation I now found myself navigating entirely alone. The shelter's staff, genuinely compassionate professionals who had apparently encountered similar situations before, though rarely involving quite such deliberate, calculated family abandonment, helped me access emergency resources throughout those first difficult weeks. Temporary housing, assistance applying for whatever financial aid remained available for my delayed college enrollment, and genuine emotional support, as I processed the devastating reality of my family's calculated decision. I deferred my university enrollment by one semester, working multiple part-time jobs throughout that period while living in transitional housing specifically designed for young people navigating exactly this kind of sudden, devastating family estrangement, building, through considerable determination and difficulty, the practical foundation I would eventually need to genuinely pursue the education and independent life my parents had apparently assumed I would struggle to achieve entirely alone. I remember specific moments throughout those difficult early months that tested my own resilience considerably. Nights spent genuinely uncertain whether I would secure sufficient housing, the particular exhaustion of working multiple jobs while also navigating complicated financial aid paperwork largely alone, moments of genuine despair regarding whether I would actually manage to build the independent, stable life I was determined to eventually achieve despite everything working against me. Throughout that devastating period, I eventually enrolled at my university one semester later than originally planned, working throughout my entire college experience to support myself financially while pursuing a degree in social work, a field I'd become genuinely passionate about throughout my own difficult experience navigating homeless youth services, understanding firsthand exactly how significant genuine, professional support could prove for young people navigating circumstances similar to my own devastating abandonment. I built, throughout those college years, genuine chosen family relationships that provided the kind of consistent warmth and support I'd never experienced throughout my actual childhood, close friendships and, eventually, a mentor relationship with a professor, Dr. Genevieve Okafor, who recognized my genuine talent and dedication toward social work, providing guidance and support that helped me navigate both my academic pursuits and the considerable emotional processing my family's abandonment continued requiring throughout those formative college years. I graduated with genuine academic distinction despite the considerable additional challenges my circumstances had required me to navigate throughout my entire college experience, building, through determined effort entirely my own, exactly the kind of independent, meaningful life my parents had apparently assumed I would struggle to achieve without their continued support or presence. I built a genuinely successful career over the following years as a social worker specifically focused on supporting homeless and displaced youth, work that felt, given my own personal history, genuinely meaningful in ways that extended considerably beyond simple professional achievement, allowing me to provide exactly the kind of support and advocacy I'd once desperately needed myself during those devastating early months following my own family's calculated abandonment. I maintained absolutely no contact whatsoever with my family throughout those years of building my independent life, understanding clearly that whatever relationship we'd once maintained had been permanently, deliberately severed the moment they'd driven away from that bus stop, leaving me with nothing beyond $14 and a devastating, unmistakable message regarding exactly how little my own presence within their family had genuinely mattered to them. I encountered my sister Delphine entirely by coincidence roughly 7 years after that devastating graduation day, both of us attending an unrelated professional conference in a city neither of us actually resided in, a chance meeting that revealed, throughout our subsequent difficult conversation, additional context regarding exactly how our parents had processed and justified their calculated decision throughout the intervening years. They always told extended family you'd chosen to leave. Delphine admitted during that difficult, unexpected conversation, her own expression carrying genuine discomfort as she processed sharing this information directly with me for the first time. That you wanted independence, that it was your own decision. I never fully believed that version, especially after everything I actually witnessed that day, but I never had the courage to challenge it directly either. I listened to Delphine's account with a complicated mixture of validation and renewed, genuine hurt, understanding that our parents had apparently constructed an entirely fabricated narrative specifically to avoid genuine accountability for their calculated abandonment. A narrative that had, apparently, successfully shaped how extended family and community members understood my sudden absence from our family's ongoing life throughout all those intervening years. Standing at a professional conference roughly 8 years after that devastating graduation day, delivering a keynote presentation regarding effective support systems for homeless and displaced youth, drawing directly from my own personal experience alongside my professional expertise, I thought often about that specific bus stop bench, about the $14 my father had handed me with such calculated precision, genuinely believing in that moment that he was watching his own daughter disappear from his life entirely and permanently. I never reconciled with my parents throughout the years following that devastating abandonment, understanding clearly that whatever explanation or apology they might eventually offer could never genuinely undo the calculated cruelty of what they'd chosen to do, timing their decision so precisely to the exact moment their legal obligation toward my continued care technically concluded. I maintained a careful, limited relationship with Delphine following our unexpected reunion, understanding that she herself had been navigating her own complicated processing regarding our family's actual dynamics throughout all those years, a relationship that felt, while genuinely meaningful, considerably more cautious and boundaried than the closeness other sisters might naturally share. I built, ultimately, an entire meaningful career and independent life directly from that devastating starting point, understanding that my parents had genuinely believed, driving away from that bus stop, that they would never need to think about me again, never anticipating that the daughter they'd so calculatedly discarded would eventually build something genuinely significant enough that her own professional work would directly, meaningfully help countless other young people navigating similarly devastating circumstances, work that represented, in its own quiet but genuinely powerful way, the most meaningful response I could have possibly offered to the $14 and the calculated abandonment that had once been intended to ensure I simply disappeared.